Hello and welcome to Book Breaks. We're so thrilled to have you here today as we welcome the author of Shirley Chisholm, Champion of Black Feminist Power Politics. And as always, we'd like to thank the Citizen Travelers, the nonpartisan civic engagement initiative of the Travelers Company, for their continued support of Book Breaks. And I'm your host, Gina Oppenheim, and I'm joined by my friend Ryan. Hey, Ryan. And without further ado, we're so thrilled to welcome Professor Anastasia Curwood, who is the professor of history and director at the Commonwealth Institute for Black Studies at the University of Kentucky. She's also the author of Stormy Weather, Middle-Class African-American Marriages Between the Two World Wars. Welcome, Professor. We're so happy to have you here today.
I'm so happy to be here. Thank you for having me.
Yes, so just to start us off, can you give us an overview of this book and how it came to be?
So this book is a cradle to grave biography of Shirley Chisholm, the best known for being the 1972 presidential candidate in the Democratic Party primaries, also a seven-term congresswoman from Brooklyn, New York, Bed-Stuy. And I know you spent some time in Brooklyn. And so she was a really remarkable historical figure. Some people remember her, but they remember her mostly for kind of the big fact that she ran for president and that somehow she was, a superhero. And really what this book is about is humanizing her. It's putting her into her historical context, which was being raised in Brooklyn, came up through Brooklyn politics, also spent a few years of her childhood in Barbados, in the Caribbean, because her parents were from Barbados. And then she went on to be a legislator, was sort of drafted into running for president, and we could talk about kind of the people who wanted her to do it. And then went back to Congress, was an amazingly effective congressperson behind the scenes, but didn't have as much in front of the cameras, and then kept building institutions after she left Congress, co-founded an organization and mentored another generation of Black women politicians. So there, before I wrote this, there wasn't a cradle to grave biography of her, and it was a pretty. When I noticed it in 2007. I'd grown up with stories of Shirley Chisholm from my parents, and I was shocked that there was no book. Took me 15 years to write the book. I'm still shocked that there's not much more written about her.
And why do you think that is outside of her own, autobiography? There are so few tomes on her career.
Yeah. So I think the way I put it is we thought we knew her, or people think they know her, because you read her autobiography or her memoirs, and she seems very open, but she tells the story that she wants people to know. It's not the whole story, and of course, it doesn't go beyond 1973. She had a whole, she lived for another, 2.5 decades after that, 3 decades, and I think people just think that they knew what she stood for, and kind of that's all you need to know. She's a strong Black woman. And if you know she's a strong Black woman, that's kind of all you need to know. But as I like to say, her actual life is more exciting and interesting than even the symbolic importance that we put on her.
Yeah, and you open the story with her dealing with an ornery Southern congressman. Can you tell us about that incident and why you decided to open with it?
That's a great question, because I went back and forth so many times thinking, how do I start this book? And I thought about starting in Barbados with her as a child, because that was a formative time for her. I thought about starting it with her giving a speech on the floor of the Democratic National Convention in 1972. And I eventually went back to this because it shows so many pieces of what made her who she was. It shows how smart she was, that she she confronts this guy who, this Southern congressman, would confront her every day, marveling at the fact that he was making the same salary she was, or vice versa, which was $42,500. So, in 1969, which is when this was, that was a good bit of money. He would marvel at it, and finally, she said she did her research. She realized that he had a bad heart, and so she said, "Look, you need to stop confronting me with this because it's obvious it's eating you up inside. It's it's going to be harmful to you. So just go away, just avoid it." But then she also said to him, "You're going to have to know there's going to be a lot more of me coming along who are going to make $42,500 just like you." And so she's like, "Oh, I'll be kind, and I know you have a bad heart, so just avoid this issue. But oh, by the way, you're you're going to have to live with this fact." And that just sort of encapsulates how she had a sense of humor, and she would do her homework, and she would kind of skewer. She knew where the power pressure points were. And then she really meant it. She really meant that she wanted to see democracy expand for everybody. She wanted to see more people who had historically been belonging to marginalized groups become active in holding political power. And that really animated her whole career. So that's why that story kind of pulls it all together.
I love it because it draws you right in. Now, you mentioned Barbados. Can you tell us about how her time as a child in Barbados sort of shaped how she viewed racism in the United States?
Yeah. When so her family was from Barbados. She says in the autobiography that her father was from Guyana. That's not true. He was technically born in Guyana, but his parents were Barbadian. He was baptized in Barbados. That makes you a Barbadian or a Bajan. They had moved there independently, but they had known each other. They'd grown up in the same neighborhood in Barbados. So when she was 4 years old, they were working night and day. Was much more cost effective to send her back to Barbados to live with her mother's mother. And from her mother's mother, Shirley St. Hill, that was her name then, she learned fearlessness and dignity. It was a society of children should be seen and not heard. And yet her grandmother encouraged her outspokenness and sort of saw herself in her granddaughter. And then also she said she got a great education there. She got a better education there than she was going to get in Brooklyn, in part because of the British colonial schools that were there. So, a mixed legacy, but she did get a good education. But the other thing she saw when she was in Barbados was that in that school, the teachers were Black, the students were Black, the most important person in the town was Black, the least important person in the town was Black, the smartest kid in the class was Black, the dumbest kid in the class was Black. She saw Blackness in a whole spectrum, and she saw Black people holding power. For sure, slavery had left a legacy of inequality in Barbados. Yet the emancipation and deliberate celebration of emancipation and the empowerment within limits of Black people there really was a sharp contrast to what we had in the United States. We had Jim Crow America, and people like to think about the Jim Crow South, but I call it Jim Crow America. We think of New York City as this blue island, or Manhattan and Long Island and Staten Island as these blue islands. But there's actually, Jim Crow society was operating just as much. It was operating implicitly and without the legal segregation laws. But the poverty, sometimes the violence, the disenfranchisement, those were happening anyway. So it was a big contrast for her. It was a big contrast for her parents, especially her father, who was politically active and very involved. And so she kind of joined this group legacy of Caribbean people coming to New York City and saying, "What the heck is this? This is wrong, and we're gonna try to infiltrate these halls of power to change it."
Yeah. And can you tell us how she entered the political sphere?
So she got into politics. Well, first she got into politics in through academics in political science at Brooklyn College. And she had a professor mentor that she really loved who said, "Why don't you be a political science major?" And she was, wonderful in the debate club. She loved debating. She loved speaking. And at the time, she said, "Oh no, I'm a Black woman. There's no way I can be active in politics." So she sort of believed that as a college student. Well, fast forward about 8 years or so, she got involved in tenants' rights organizations because she was an early childhood education teacher. So that was her other passion, was education and teaching. And when she did, she learned that the families of her students were dealing with unfair housing conditions, ineffective maintenance and insufficient facilities. So that's how she first got involved. But what she likes to talk about as her first involvement is meeting Wesley MacDonald Holder, who was running a campaign to get a black judge elected in Kings County, and she got involved with that, and then that became the Bedford-Stuyvesant Political League, which was active for several years in the 1950s, mid-late 1950s. From there, she tried to depose Mac Holder as the president of the Bedford-Stuyvesant Political League. It backfired, but another group started up, and she went and joined them, and Mac Holder's organization kind of withered. So that they were eventually she wound up in the Unity Democratic Club, which was an insurgent club trying to disrupt the whites-only power structure in Kings County Democratic politics.
Something that's fascinating you write about is that she practiced intersectionality before there was a term for that. Can you tell us about that?
Absolutely. So she's in a Black feminist tradition. But at the time she was coming up, there's not so much of a model for that. Black women's feminist tradition has always practiced intersectionality, and it's important to understand what intersectionality is or what intersectional is having more than one aspect of one's identity that is part of a power configuration. So in her case, she was Black, she was a girl and then a woman. She was from an immigrant family. She was from a poor and later working class family. So she understood that you can't take any one of those things in somebody's life when they have those multiple identities and separate one out, because eventually some of the other aspects of their identity are going to come to bear. You need to look holistically at how does power work for everyone and make sure that everyone is bolstered and is treated fairly. So she didn't have a term for that. She tried a few different terms. She tried twin jeopardy, Blackness and womanness. Some people in her office talked about the true, the right, and the beautiful. What's fair. She had different terms for it, but in the early 1990s, when Kimberly Crenshaw came up with the term intersectionality, what Crenshaw was identifying was a tradition that had that was at least a couple hundred years old at that point.
Yeah, and we're going to talk about her presidential campaign shortly, but wanted to ask you, what were some of her biggest successes while in office, maybe that people don't talk about enough?
Well, I think the number one thing that I see as her major success is sort of the zenith of the world of possibility that she represented was in 1971. And in 1971, both houses of Congress sent to President Nixon's desk the Comprehensive Child Development Act of 1971. Embedded in that final version was a budget for universal child care in the United States. When you think about what would have happened if everybody in the United States had access to childcare, and for her, it was important to have quality childcare, dependable childcare, not have it take the bite out of family budgets that it took then, and it's only gotten bigger now. And she got it to Nixon's desk, and Nixon vetoed it. It was not a foregone conclusion, but Nixon wound up being advised to veto it by another distinguished New York politician, Daniel Patrick Moynihan, who is identified more and held office as a Democrat, but was sort of small c conservative in terms of the fact that he thought that the family should be supporting and doing this childcare work. And what he meant was women staying home. Now, that wasn't an option. Shirley Chisholm, with her intersectional identity, she knows that working women, poor women, immigrant women, women of color were far less likely to have access to a person who could just support them to stay home and take care of children. And also, as an ambitious woman, she knew that it was important to have women's full economic citizenship and be able to go out to the workplace and earn a living wage. So she got that passed. She collaborated with Bella Abzug, Carl Perkins, who was then the chair of the Committee on Education and Labor. He was a Kentuckian. I'm a Kentuckian.
Yeah.
He really respected her. He made her the chair of the conference committee that reconciled the House and Senate versions of the bill. And she made sure that provision got in there. But Nixon vetoed, saying, well, this is a gross overreach of a socially radical bill, and I'm not going to sign it. But I think about that moment because that's a tremendous success that she had leveraged her legislative savvy, her relationships, her knowledge of what was going on in her district, her knowledge of what was going on in people's lives. And she had created some concrete legislation that would have really transformed the world of work and childcare and our society. So I see it as a success. Now, as far as bills she actually got passed, she did in both the state legislature and in the US Congress. She got versions of bills passed that extended minimum wage protections and other protections to household workers. Her mother had been a household worker. Her grandmother was a household worker. She understood that if you exclude this whole group of workers from minimum wage protections, those people have families to feed, those people have lives to conduct, and they need economic independence. She did get those passed. And the last thing I'll say in terms of legislation is that she eventually wound up on the Rules Committee. So it's very famous that she protested her original committee assignment to the agriculture and the forestry subcommittee. And she later came to respect those committees, but she wound up on education and labor. That was her favorite. In 1976, she wound up on rules. Rules is the committee that decides what and how the legislation is that gets to the floor to actually be voted on in Congress. It is the gatekeeper. So it's that committee and Ways and Means that really hold the reins of power in the Congress. She was the first woman on that committee. She was the first Black woman on that committee, obviously. Andrew Young of Georgia had been on that committee for a session before that, but she leveraged her work on that committee to decide what would come to the floor and what wouldn't. And that's something that's about invisible. Most of us never think in our lives about the House Rules Committee, unless you're on Capitol Hill and you live that life, or you're a political junkie or something. But most Americans walk around in their daily lives and Rules Committee, who cares? But it's an important locus of power, and she was right there. And we'll never actually know everything that she accomplished on that committee.
Absolutely. And can you tell us about her decision to run for president and why she did that?
Yeah, so I said she was drafted because she really, as ambitious as she was, and she was incredibly ambitious. She had a lot of self-confidence. She really believed in herself. I try to take strength from her in that regard myself. She has a lot of good leadership lessons to teach us. So, she probably liked the idea of running for president as an ambitious person. But really what it was first of all, anti-war students who she wound up, she gave a speech against the war in her first year in Congress. And then all of a sudden she starts getting all these speaking invitations from campus groups. So she's riding the circuit of speaking invitations, talking about the Vietnam War in 1969. So, that's the issue. If you think about it, if there was somebody who becomes prominent in the current campus protests. So today we're sitting here in May 2024. There are a lot of campus protests going on again. It's as if someone in Congress goes to those groups and speaks out. They're going to get invited to speak to those campus groups because they need to be reflected and to be heard and to get some insight from sympathetic folks who hold power. So they kept asking her if she was going to run. The other people who kept asking her if she was going to run were Black women, especially in Florida. There's a whole cadre of Black women local officials in Florida who are asking her to run. There are women out in California in the National Organization for Women who are trying to get her to run. And also some young people connected with the Black Panther Party, including a very young Barbara Lee, who's now in Congress. So there's sort of this a coalition of folks saying, are you going to run for president? You need to run for president. You got to do this. And so she got a check from Florida and she said, all right, I guess I have to do it. I guess I've got to run. And so she did. But I think she loved it because her vision was not to win. She ran to win. She understood she wasn't going to win. What she wanted to do was to have this coalition bring pressure to bear on, in this case, the Democratic Party and national politics in general. She wanted to influence the platform. She wanted to influence the eventual nominee's promises. So that's why she eventually wound up running, was to build this coalition and keep it together. It fell apart during the campaign, but in some ways, it's never gone away.
Yeah, and can you tell us about the significance of her appearance at the 1972 Democratic Convention?
So do you mean her appearance literally, as in her fashion? Or do you mean
Oh, I'm sorry. I mean, we could
what she
talk
did?
about both. They're both
Yeah, yeah. Yeah,
fascinating.
yeah, real, because her appearance was fascinating. I mean, she's so iconic. Um, her hair, the big bouffant, it's a wig. She started wearing wigs in late 1969, 1970. She had Carolyn Smith in her office helped her kind of develop her new style because she was a little stodgy before that. So Carolyn Smith helped her kind of bring her style up current. It was very elegant, but it was also accessible, I think, to young people. And she prized young people's support so much. She wanted to be accessible. And also she needed to look elegant because everybody's appearance is important in politics. But for Black women, it's really important. It's really important to be seen as put together. And so, and she was always put together. So her appearance is very, very important, like her literal appearance and aesthetic. Um, but as far as her getting up on that stage, um, she is the first person bringing Black feminist ideas to this national stage. And this whole idea, she comes from a place as a Black woman, but what she does is she universalizes it. She talks to everybody who feels like they're kind of on the wrong side of power. And she says, let's band together. We can do this together. We are much more powerful in numbers than we are by ourselves. We all want to expand democracy. We will all benefit from expanding democracy. So it's just tremendous. And she got just over 150 delegates at the sort of high point of the vote counting for her. That was not equaled by a Black person for another 12 years, Jesse Jackson. And it was not equaled by a woman for another 30, now I'm going to have trouble with math. Yeah, 36 years by Hillary Clinton. So it's a tremendous achievement that she got that far. And yeah, she wanted to show people she could get that far, but it's also, she represented for a whole generation of folks who didn't see themselves as part of politics. Oh, okay, I can be involved in politics.
Yeah. And how has her representation in pop culture really helped how people remember her, especially the last few years?
Yeah, well, so I'm thrilled to see the pop culture references to her because we need to know more about her. And I'm hoping that then people get curious, that then they want to read more and learn more when they see references to her. So, and I have noticed that the book just came out in paperback so that it's a little bit more accessible in terms of price. So I hope it really encourages people to get a hold of the book or just use their local libraries. Um, the other thing, though, it's funny because she's um, a little bit of a blank slate because people don't know a whole lot about who she was actually. Um, People kind of read into her what they want, and the recent film that's on Netflix, it's a gorgeous film. Regina King is brilliant. It is a lot of artistic license. So double check the facts before you cite them from the film because some of them are just not, that's not how it happened. But for one thing, she was a mentor to Ron Dellums, not the other way around.
Hmm.
And it looks a little bit in the film like he was mentoring her, but she got to Congress first and was a mentor to him. But that this is what a lot of people think about Shirley Chisholm. They think if they don't give you a seat at the table, bring a folding chair, that she said that. As it turns out, I've read about every speech of hers. I've read articles she's written. I can't find anywhere she said that. But what you can see is that one of her mentees, Donna Brazil, said that Chisholm said it to her, to Donna Brazil. So it sounds like something she would have said, but it also could be that Donna Brazil sort of paraphrased or, put her own spin on something that Shirley Chisholm said to her, which is, you just go put yourself in there. So I feel ambivalent about that because I'm a historian. I want it to be, factual and everything. But then I love the idea that people understand that Shirley Chisholm gives them permission to go assert themselves in a place where people don't want them to be and have, sort of have an unjustly denied access. So, I'm okay with that.
Well, that seems like a great spot to hand you over to my friend Ryan, who's going to start with our Student Scholar of the Week. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thanks so much. This has been just awesome to listen to. And as Gina alluded to, and our longtime listeners know, we always begin this part of the program with our History Scholar question of the week. And just a quick reminder, this is a weekly competition in which students from all across the country and world have an opportunity to submit a question, and the winning question will be read aloud to our esteemed guest, and that student and their teacher will receive a $50 gift card to our great gift shop. And this week, our winner is Milo. He goes to, or they go to LREI High School. And the question is this: what overlooked aspect of Shirley Chisholm's personal life or career do you believe had the biggest influence on her political career?
So what overlooked aspect of her personal life had the biggest influence on her political career? Gosh. Well, I think I want to go back again to her ambition. Sometimes we want to think of her as sort of having all these pure motivations, like, oh, I see this injustice and I'm going to go after it and I'm going to change it and I'm going to fix it. And there was some of that. I mean, that's not untrue. The thing that kind of made her Shirley Chisholm, though, was this ambition and this confidence and the belief that she could fix it, that she was sort of uniquely capable and uniquely suited. And she was not going to let it go. So in some cases, this led to conflict with people in her lives, or in her life. There was, I know that the Netflix film shows this a little bit, but doesn't actually explain kind of how this came about. She was estranged from most people in her family, except her sister Muriel. Actually, her sister Muriel was they remained in touch. The reason for that estrangement was a dispute over inheritance. It was a dispute over actually a life insurance policy that Chisholm's father had named her a beneficiary of, and not her three sisters and her mother. All of them got a modest cash inheritance, but this life insurance policy went to Chisholm. Now, her family said, I think, you should give some of that to us. You should share that with us. We've shared the inheritance and you should share it with us. She refused. And within a couple of years, she was running for New York State Assembly. Political campaigns are expensive. She needed the money for her political career. And despite the pleas of her family, she kept it. And the family was never the same again. So it's a moment of, it's a fork in the road. What do I do? Do I, take care of my family, do what they want me to do, and, forego this opportunity? Or do I pour it into my political career? And she chose her political career pretty much over her family. it had reverberations in the rest of her life. But it tells you just how committed she was to rising in politics, to her career of achievement in politics, and to the politics themselves. So that's the point I chose. And that's a really great question from Milo.
Yeah,
Thank you.
absolutely. And they are, Professor, normally quite good, and this week is no exception. And actually, just as a quick aside, John in our chat pointed out that perhaps another route to go with that with an answer would have been the fact that Shirley Chisholm spoke Spanish, which I wasn't aware of, and might have been helpful in some campaigning as well. So thank you to John in our chat.
Yes, yes, especially her first campaign for Congress.
Yes, definitely.
It was instrumental.
Hudson says, or rather asks, how did Shirley Chisholm's efforts to unite liberal and Black politicians to challenge the established power structure in 1972 influence subsequent political strategies and movements? Or, any contemporary examples reflect that legacy, etc.?
Yeah, so she tried to connect liberal and Black politicians. Some connected, some didn't. As with all coalitions, it's fragile. Coalitions are, as she said, the hardest part, sort of extremely difficult to pull off, because people tend to look at sort of their personal interests and don't often see what they have in common with others. But how did it influence later? Well, what it did was it pulled new actors into politics. So the folks who worked in her congressional office and on her campaign themselves went on to be political operatives, to be in aides in Congress, staffers on Capitol Hill. Some of them went on to run for office. So that generation was sort of a whole new generation of energy. And those folks, I guess they've retired in the last 10, 20 years, but they really were in power for a long time. Since then, there are other politicians who have come up as well. So Barbara Lee is the most famous. She also mentored Ron Dellums. She mentored Donna Brazile, I mentioned. Maxine Waters was part of the group that she mentored. So there's a whole generation of folks in politics. And then finally, it's impossible to dismiss the inspiration factor that she indicated to people, oh, this is possible. So in her workings, she's in the halls of power. She sometimes successfully, sometimes unsuccessfully bridges liberals and Black politicians. But the fact that she's there doing it is also really instrumental. So I think it's important not to write off the symbolic piece of what it was that she accomplished. It's almost easier to answer that question and what didn't her efforts to unite liberal and Black politicians accomplish? And it's that coalition piece. It's people saying, oh no, well, that doesn't apply to me.
Right.
Why should I care? And not kind of seeing that common point of interest.
Fascinating. Thank you so much for that. And we have a question about, if you wouldn't mind talking a little bit about the People and Peace Not Profits speech against the Vietnam War, and just more generally her views about Vietnam. How was that speech in particular received, etc.?
So the speech that this is a wonderfully knowledgeable audience.
Yes.
So I love these deep questions.
I warned you.
Yeah, well, it's great because
Yes.
I don't have to, although I should explain a little bit.
Yeah.
So the speech, I alluded to this a little while ago. It's 1969. It's her first floor speech in Congress. And she wrote about it in her memoir, Unbought and Unbossed, has the speech in it. So who did it help her reach, I think is the piece of the question, right?
That's the main thrust, I would say.
Yeah. So it got her, so she's saying, I'm not going to vote yes on any funding for Vietnam until we get our priorities straight. We are feeding, housing, and clothing Americans. She wound up getting a lot of audience from Women's Strike for Peace. That was a group that was in the gallery of the House the day she gave the speech. And then they start inviting her to things, rallies. I think she spoke in New York City. So she gets noticed by this branch of the feminist movement that is anti-war, but also there are a lot of equal rights feminists. There's a lot of overlap with feminist movements. And so in some part that draws her into what became the National Women's Political Caucus with Gloria Steinem, Bella Abzug, and Betty Friedan. So there's that side of it. Then she's also getting noticed by the students. She gives that speech. It's 1969. It's a charged moment. And again, we're at another sort of inflection moment right now. Just think of the kind of ways that people are on edge now. And in this case, we're in the process of losing tens of thousands of American lives in Vietnam, let alone, many more lives of Vietnamese folks. So she gets in with those folks too. They start to really see her as an ally. She had run not as an anti-war candidate. She had been, Gene McCarthy had kind of been very friendly to her in 1968 in the previous presidential election cycle. And she was at the 1968 convention as a member of the New York Democratic Party's delegation. But it was really that speech that just sort of energized and galvanized. Then she goes to protests on the Capitol steps where people are getting arrested. She's trying to support the people there. So it brings her, frankly, to a national audience. It gets attention, and people respond across the country.
Fascinating. Thank you so much for that. As mentioned at the onset, we have so many teachers and students and teachers tuning into today's program, and we're thankful for that. And Isaac says that he is a teacher in Florida teaching AP African American Studies, an AP African American Studies course at a private school in Florida.
Good for you.
Yes, very much so. I'm curious to hear more about Florida's role in her presidential campaign. Chisholm is an explicit part of Unit 4 for them, naturally about the rise of Black politicians in the U.S. So if you could talk a little bit about that. And also, if I might add, just as a brief part two, since we have so many teachers in this chat, in this call, how can they utilize your specific and great work in the classroom if they wanted to get your book more into the classroom, which I'm sure many would like to do.
Well, gosh, that makes me think maybe I should write a more manageable book, because this thing is a little bit of a doorstop. I'm not gonna lie. If you get bored with it, just use it as a paperweight. It's got a lot of uses. If you need to sort of put your laptop up, top up a little higher, just put it up on the book. So anyway, that's another plug for this book. But realistically, it might be a good idea to have sort of a distillation of it. However, I encourage teachers, read it as, with an open mind about what grabs you. What is it that about her story that, really resonates with your students' lives for where you are? For this colleague in Florida, the Florida story is going to resonate.
Yes.
And she was, so this group of of Black women elected officials in Florida wanted her to come to Florida and campaign. They thought she could do better than she wound up doing, which I think was about 2% or something of the vote in the primary. But they set her up with funding because the whole campaign, her campaign organization spent about $300,000. Like that's the whole campaign. And so when they raised 5 figures, it's a significant amount of money. They brought her to both South Florida and North Florida. So she was in Miami. She didn't understand in 1972, she didn't quite get that she thought, oh, I can speak Spanish. I'm going to talk to Cuban migrants. I know how to talk to immigrants and I can speak Spanish. I'm going to do this. The Cuban, expatriates, white Cuban expatriates, Black Cubans are a different story. But white Cuban expatriates were not wanting to listen to Black feminist power ideas. They were much more small C conservative, and they're not showing up. And she didn't really understand that it was going to be like that. But she did campaign in Miami, and she had some good appearances. Then on another trip, she went to North Florida. And North Florida, it's right there next to Alabama, in the Panhandle. There's a Confederate statue at the courthouse steps where she was speaking. George Wallace spoke later the same day where she was speaking. Like she's very conscious that she's in a plantation economy, a place that got its wealth from a plantation economy, from slavery. So she's really in that sort of more rural area with smaller towns. She's feeling much more like she's in kind of the, she's in this old slavery area. So she had very different experiences, but she had strong supporters in both places, especially college students from Tallahassee, and of course women. So it's an interesting juxtaposition for her, the differences in that state. And I think you probably could use that to talk about differences among people in the state to this day. And Florida is has a really heterogeneous population. There are people, geographical differences on the coast versus centrally. I mean, it's really a microcosm. So you could talk about the diversity of the electorate.
Yes,
using her experience.
absolutely. Homer asks and thank you for that great question and answer. Homer asks, I think, an important but simple question. Just if you could talk a little bit more about Shirley Chisholm's relationship specifically with the Black Power movement in the late 1960s.
I would say that Chisholm in the late 1960s has one of the 2-3 strongest relationships with Black Power activists in Congress and really in national politics, because there's Thurgood Marshall at that point, the Supreme Court. President Nixon didn't have a strong relationship with Black Power activists. So really, they are looking to her, and she pretty early on in Congress goes after some of the Cold War era laws, anti-sedition acts and things like that were being disproportionately applied to activists on the left, and especially Black Power activists. So she immediately sees this double standard. She's like, look, why is the KKK getting away with this? And you're using these laws to go after this particular set of activists. I mean, I understand why it's happening, she said, but let's get rid of the law. It's dangerous. It's damaging. It's being applied unequally. And I think her willingness to kind of say, what was morally wrong about the current configuration of power really got the attention of Black power. Black power is self-determination for Black people. There are all sorts of ideological strains of Black power. Black Panther movement is one of the most well-known. And indeed, she had a strong relationship with the Black Panther Party of California when she was running for president in 72. Because again, she's saying, look, this system is, our economy is built to have a 4% unemployment rate. And so that's kind of how, that's how it hums along. Well, there's something very wrong with that. If we have to have 4% of our working population not able to get a job for our economy to run smoothly. And why are we blaming these people, the people who cannot get a job, for this problem, when it's actually in the best interest of those who have power to have it this way? And so she got that. I mean, it was an economic critique as much as an anti-racist critique that Black power activists had. And they said, oh, well, this person is standing for what, we share ideology with this person. And the other thing is, she would say, I don't necessarily agree with everything this group does, and yet I see their point. So, you might not like the messenger, but the message is valid. And so it was a very, I think it was a mutually respectful relationship, as opposed to this profound disrespect that most Black power activists ran into.
Fascinating. Thank you so much for that. And just keeping an eye on time, maybe we have time for one or two more questions. And I think if this is a final question, it's a rather salient one. Israel asks, or rather states, that she had meaning Shirley Chisholm, of course, had such a legendary career. When the students ask what is the most important thing that she did, and they always do whenever you bring an individual up, what do you feel is the best answer to give? Is it her coalition building, her legislation, as a mentor, etc.?
The most important thing that Shirley Chisholm did was run for president, 1972, and get all those delegates. So as much as I want people to understand the nuances of who she was, we wouldn't really be talking about her in this way if she hadn't run for president. The fact that she took this set of ideas, I call them Black feminist power politics. It's a blend of Black power, feminism, and political action. She took this set of ideas to the highest office in the land, or the aspiration to it. Like, that is going to the heart of power. It's radical in the sense of getting at the root of power. She's going right for the big prize. And, that's pretty remarkable. The fact that she did it. So I would say pay attention to who she was, why she did it, how she did it, all those pieces. But the fact that she did it, that's what you want your students to know.
Well said. Thank you so much. Again, I just want to apologize. We had so many more questions than we had time to get to. But as I frequently say, that a great remedy for that is getting and purchasing and getting your hands on this great book. And there's a link in the chat to our bookshop.org so that you may do so. And we encourage everyone, especially the teachers in the audience, to get your hands on this wonderful biography. Gina, back to you for some final thoughts.
Yes, and as Ryan said, if you purchase it today at bookshop.org, the affiliate commission we receive supports our programming for history teachers and students. And we hope you'll join us next week as we discuss True Believer, Hubert Humphrey's quest for a more just America. And you can always watch and archive more than 175 different presentations at gilderlehrman.org/bookbreaks. And you can also find on our website documents, essays, digital exhibitions, the Hamilton Education Program, and so much more. Thank you so much for joining us today, Professor. It was such an honor to have you here to talk about such a remarkable woman.
Oh, it's my pleasure. I was really glad to get all those great questions. I know I'm long-winded. I would love to answer more questions. I'm just grateful for your engagement, everybody here. So thank you.
Have
Thank
a
you
great
so
day, everyone.